everyone. So today we're going to get to an updated prediction of Senator Bernie Sanders from the state of Vermont versus President Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election. So let's get right into it. So I have the expanding battleground map for 2020. And so states like Virginia, Colorado, and Nevada, that's already kind of been rated as leaning Democrat, I do see also voting for Bernie Sanders. Trump's approval rating in these states are pretty comparable to some blue states. And in more traditional swing states like Florida and Ohio, they have much higher approval rating than in Colorado, Nevada, and Virginia. And if you've seen over the past 4 years, they have moved closer towards the Democratic Party. The legislature and the governor now is in control in Colorado. Virginia, they have the legislature a lot more democratic over the past couple of years. They continually been electing Democrats statewide office by large margins. And Nevada, on statewide elections have been closer, but their legislature is also controlled by Democrats. So and they did make recent gains in the midterms. So I feel like with Trump, and again, him not really doing all that well with Hispanic voters, for any Democrat, these states, Nevada, I could see maybe voting for Trump, but against Bernie, he's relatively popular. He's one of the most popular politicians in the country, and I think he would win those Hillary Clinton states. In the same way, I don't think Texas is going to be voting for Bernie Sanders. Yes, it was much closer in 2016. Battle Royale got close, but I feel like Bernie Sanders is not really going to spend time expanding the battleground map. I think he's going to spend a lot more time in the Rust Belt, because Democrats kind of forgot about that region. Hillary Clinton kind of ignored it. They kind of written off as Democratic states. So I feel like Bernie's going to spend a lot of time in the Rust Belt, and most of his appeal are to white working class voters in the Rust Belt. Yes, Bernie Sanders doesn't do awful, percentage wise with the Democrats. With minority voters, he'll still probably get closer to 90%. In the African American vote, he'll probably get over 70% in the Hispanic vote, in the Asian vote, and all those minorities. So I don't really see he's not going to do worse than every other Democrat. But at the same time, I don't really see him turning out a bunch of new minority voters that usually never vote in their lives to come out to vote for him. That maybe another candidate would be a little bit better than Bernie on. But that being said, I see him sweeping the Rust Belt. That effectively makes him president, because these states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, voted close to 1% or less than 1% for Donald Trump in 2016. They're very close states, and a lot of the Obama voters would vote for Bernie Sanders because of his appeal to white working class voters. He's not really all that open to free trade. He's said the same rhetoric as Trump in trying to bring factory jobs back to America. He also his policy. He's a very anti-corruption message, which appeals to these voters, this populace. Wisconsin, these kind of states were historically have been very prone to populists. So these white working class voters, I think, can flip towards Bernie Sanders. That being said, I think Iowa and Ohio are toss-ups. Yes, they voted for Donald Trump by a relatively large margin in 2016, over 5 points. But, I think these states have such a big swing. For example, in 2004, George W. Bush barely carried the state. In 2008, Obama won it by a healthy margin. A little bit lower in 2012, and then a big swing towards Donald Trump. So I think because these white voters tend to vote Republican, except for these white working class voters that dominate these states, I think they tend to flipping either side. So I think Bernie's great appeal would help him in the Rust Belt. With that being said, let's go on to these. Oh, and then New Hampshire. It's neighboring to Bernie's home state of Vermont. It's very low approval rating for Donald Trump in New Hampshire. He lost to Hillary Clinton. Most likely he would win that New Hampshire. Same reason goes for Minnesota. I also think that Bernie's going to win the 2nd congressional district out in Maine. It voted the first time for Donald Trump and to give their electoral vote for him. It's a very rural, again, white kind of area, which people like Obama and John Kerry have won in the past, and I think Bernie Sanders can win. And also, the Democrats did pick up back this House seat in 2018, so I think the trends, especially I don't think all Democrats can win that district, but I think Bernie can, because he can bring out white voters. Now, if you go to these Sunbelt states in the South, I don't think Bernie can do particularly well in them. I think Georgia would vote for Trump. Yes, Stacey Abrams got close in 2018, but again, I don't think Bernie's electoral strategy would be the Sunbelt, and I don't think Bernie can excite more minority voters than Stacey Abrams would. I don't really think, and plus, Trump's approval rating is not horrible in Georgia, and I see that going for Donald Trump. In Florida, also Trump has a net approval rating of +2, but this would be North Carolina and Florida would be very close. I'll get back to that in a moment. Arizona, I'm going to give for Donald Trump. Yes, the Democrats picked up the Arizona Senate seat in 2018, but it was relatively close. In a presidential level, Trump can get it out his base in Arizona. The Arpaio type of voters in Arizona that are popular, he can get out his base in Arizona the same way the Democrats can get the Hispanic vote in Arizona. I think some Democrats may barely be able to carry the state, but I don't think Bernie will be able to excite Hispanic voters enough to come out to vote for him. North Carolina, I think it's going to be relatively close. Because even though it's a high proportion of minority voters, Bernie didn't do too horrible in the Democratic primary, which is mostly, minority voters. I think he got roughly, if my memory serves correct, 46% of the vote. And so I think we'll be very close. But Trump has a net positive approval rating here. And with polls tending to slightly... I think it's shown in 2018 Senate races, and I think in 2016, I think the polls tend to underestimate Trump's support a little bit. So, that being said, I think North Carolina would vote for Donald Trump. In the same way, I also think, although Florida would be very close, it's a perennial battleground, things like, climate change, the Parkland shooting, all these factors would be considered in the presidential race and could favor the Democrats, but I kind of see Donald Trump winning the state, mainly because when in doubt, Florida votes Republican. Especially Democrats haven't won that many statewide races in the last 20, 30 years. Andrew Gillum lost to Ron DeSantis in 2018, despite Gillum kind of being up in the polls, and that was a kind of a referendum, the Gillum and the Bernie side of the party versus Ron DeSantis, who was essentially a Trump Republican, and I think that kind of showed you how that kind of race dynamic could play out. And so I think Florida would vote for Donald Trump. He has a net positive approval rating of +2 in Florida, and so I think, and the Hispanic voters in Florida tend to vote a little more conservative than normal Hispanic voters in other states. So I think Donald Trump would win it. If you go to Nebraska, 2nd congressional district, I see that voting for Trump. The Democrats lost this in the midterms. I think it definitely could go for Bernie Sanders, who wouldn't necessarily write it off for Trump, but it has been tending to vote, especially because it's in Nebraska, where there's a lot of white working class voters, it would be Bernie could appeal to people in that congressional district, but it would be relatively close. But I think Trump kind of narrowly takes it. If we go to Iowa and Ohio are kind of tough to call. I kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier, but both, I think Ohio, I'm going to say votes for Donald Trump. The reason why is there are a good proportion of minority voters in Ohio, including working class voters, that I don't think Bernie will be able to turn out as much at as much numbers as needed to win it in a statewide race. Also, Trump's approval rating is tied between disapproval and approval rating, so it definitely would be competitive, Ohio. But looking at the midterms, even are kind of split. They won the governor's race by a healthy margin, but the Democrats won the Senate race in a healthy margin. So it's a little bit iffy. But at this point, I'm gonna give it to Donald Trump unless I see some new polling data out. I see Trump with a slight edge there, considering he won it by a big margin in 2016. Iowa, I'm going to give for Bernie Sanders. I'm going to flip that from 2016. The reason being is 3 out of the 4 2018 House races voted for Democrats, so there's a little bit of a trend. And so this is a completely rural state. And if you looked at, if you compare the 2008 map to the 2016 presidential map, it's almost complete opposites. Like a lot of counties in 2008 voted Democrat, while mostly the state was dominated by Republicans in the 2016 election. And I don't think it's because the white working class voter can tend to shift back and forth. Iowa voted for Michael Dukakis over George H.W. Bush, which kind of shows that, Democrats have been successful in here. And I think Bernie can bring it back to its traditional swing state status. Obama did very well in Iowa. I think with this, white, rural area, Bernie Sanders can do a lot well. And the trade issues, I think the tariffs, which is one of Trump's arguments that you could say he's for the working classes, works better in Ohio than it does in Iowa, because Iowa's more farming, where Ohio there's a lot more manufacturing that could benefit from the tariffs. So that is why I think Ohio and Iowa might split. But, again, states like North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, they're perennial battlegrounds. It would be very competitive at a presidential level. So I have Bernie Sanders winning the presidency with 285 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 253 electoral votes. That's a relatively narrow electoral college victory. However, I think the popular vote, Bernie would be able to win very decent margin. I think close to 2008 levels, maybe 7 or 8 points. The reason being, I think the country's getting a lot polarized. So you'll have big margins for the Democrats, I think, ever. In states like California, New York, and the Democrats will kind of, especially for Bernie, because he appeals to the base of the Democratic Party, is going to really increase the margin for him. Also, I think he's going to narrow margins in states like Missouri, Indiana, and some states maybe in Montana, out in the mountain area of the country, because of his appeal to white working class voters. He can narrow the margin, because in these states there are not a lot of minority voters, but Obama was able to do Obama won Indiana in 2008. He got close to winning Missouri and Montana in 2008. So these have shown in the past that they can vote for Democrats, but they vote for a specific type of Democrat. Because there's less minority voters, you really need a candidate that's appealing to the white working class. Although I don't think Bernie can win it, because I think Trump has been gaining popularity in these states. Indiana being Mike Pence's home state, I think Trump is going to still win them. but Bernie's going to be able to lower the margin in the Republican states than normal, while increasing his margin in the Democratic states, so that even though there's a relatively narrow electoral college victory, he's going to have a very decent, very good popular vote victory. So, with that being said, this is my prediction for January 2018. Again, election is about 2 years away. A lot could change, but especially with new polling data, there hasn't been a lot of statewide polling data. So with that, stay tuned. Consider subscribing for updated prescription, and have a great day.